I'm not ceding any territory. That's what I said from the get-go. My first stop was in the Black community in Milwaukee. I've been in the Hispanic communities, Black churches, Hispanic churches. I'm fighting on college campuses. I was just on a college campus last night giving a speech. So, too often Republicans let the Democrats play on the entire territory and they only play in their lanes. And that's wrong. I mean, we've got to make a shift. Ronald Reagan, broad tent, bring as many people into our party, and that's what we need to do. And I think that's happening. And I'm really glad to see that President Trump, think when he went down to Atlanta and went into the Black community and the reaction he got. We've got to do more of that, and every Republican has to.
All right, guys, I hope you're excited for the weekend. When we come out of the weekend, we will be down to the final 2 weeks of this campaign. I'm excited. I appreciate all of the people that watched and shared Road to 270 this week. Some big changes there, aren't there? Georgia, North Carolina, even Arizona. I think the one that, if you hear over and over again, we talk about the most, it's Wisconsin, because the pollsters keep telling us it's the toughest one to poll. Today, I'm going to talk about two things that are critical to understanding this. Eric Hovde is about to join us. Eric Hovde is the Republican candidate in Wisconsin. That race is getting very, very close. The Democrats are freaking out. And this is important, not just for Eric Hovde in the Senate, but I also think those 10 electoral votes are critical for Donald Trump, the crack in the blue wall. So Eric Hovde is on his way up. We're going to want to talk about that. And then I'm going to talk to one of the leading experts about this get out the vote effort. What's happening on the ground in the battleground states to persuade people to turn them out to get them to early vote. You will never hear this conversation anywhere but here. So stay tuned for that because no one else is going to be talking about this weekend, and you will be smarter going into this. All right, before I get to the conversation with Eric Hovde, I want to tell you about a great guy. He's not running for anything. It is my friend Leo Grillo. Leo is the founder of Delta Rescue. Now, if you've been watching the show for a while, you know what I'm talking about. Delta Rescue, founded by Leo, is a no-kill sanctuary for life. Leo told me the first time we met, he said, Sean, it's not a shelter, it's a sanctuary. And I was like, okay, I don't really know the difference. And he said, a shelter takes animals in, they try to get them new homes. This is a sanctuary. Delta Rescue takes care of malnutrition, cats, dogs, horses, you name it, that are abused and neglected, that need veterinary care for life. And if you go to deltarescue.org and see what Leo has built, you'll see what I'm talking about. It is unbelievable how this thing has grown from the first dog that he rescued, ironically named Delta. And but he doesn't do it with a bunch of government programs, right? He does it out of his own personal earnings, his mission, his belief, his love for animals, but he needs our help. So if you can go to deltarescue.org, you watch the videos, you'll see what I mean. You'll get hooked. And then think about a contribution to help Leo do this. If you're a dog lover, an animal lover, or a rescuer, help out Delta Rescue. Do that for me. And go to that estate planning kit. You'll see it up top right there on the website. Just download it and think about your estate, your legacy. Can you, if you're a dog lover, or a cat lover, or a horse lover, whatever, an animal lover, download it, pray on it, consider it if you can make this part of yours. If you got some stocks or something that you can make as part of your contribution, your legacy to keep this an enduring mission for generations to come. Thank you for your consideration. All right, without further ado, I want to bring in Eric Hovde. Eric, as you know, is the Senate candidate there in Wisconsin. We'll talk to him about that. And then on the flip side, we're going to talk about what's going on the ground. Eric Hovde, welcome back to the race. Good to see you.
Great being on your show, Sean.
All right, I want to play for folks. You have probably one of the most creative ads this cycle. I want people to see what we're talking about. Let's play the ad, and then I want to get you to react.
Meet Eric Hovde, the worst person in human history. He hates puppies, rainbows, football, and ice cream. He once said Santa should be arrested for breaking and entering. He owns a home in Transylvania because he's really a vampire and wants to suck your blood. And if he's elected to the Senate, he will make everyone wear purple and force kids to eat nothing but asparagus and Brussels sprouts. What a jerk.
Whenever I turn on the TV, I have to laugh at the latest attacks on me. But what else should you expect from a career politician like Tammy Baldwin when she can't run on her record? She doesn't want to talk about voting no against cutting taxes on Social Security benefits, or giving illegal immigrants taxpayer-funded checks, or forcing girls to compete against guys in high school sports. Her record is radical, extreme, and wrong. I'm Eric Hovde. I approve this message. It's time for a change.
Okay, so talk to me about what the idea behind that, because I watched it initially. The reaction is this really his ad? And then, I mean, I got the joke about 10 seconds in, but what made you want to go with that tactic?
Because if you've watched Senator Baldwin's whole campaign, it has been trying to get the people of Wisconsin to hate me. She hasn't ran on any issue. She's not talking about the economy. She's not talking about the border. She's not talking about our failing healthcare system, about housing being unaffordable, about the fact that we're choking in debt. All it is trying to make up crazy things like, I think farmers are lazy. I don't think older people should vote. I want to take away their Social Security. She actually ran an ad attacking me being against single moms, which is interesting because I married a single mom and I have housing for single moms in Wisconsin. So look, her whole campaign has just been one lie after another. And so they've defined me as the jerk from California, or the California jerk, which is also priceless because I'm a fourth generation Wisconsinite, born here, raised here, live here, pay my taxes here, vote here. And I've spent a lot more time in my state in Wisconsin than Senator Baldwin ever has. So, that's why I ended up doing it. You got to have some humor, and everybody's had a good time laughing at the ad.
I was going to say that the own the hone in Transylvania. Although I will say, from what I understand, working for Reince Priebus, if you say you hate football, that's probably equal to making kids eat asparagus and broccoli, somewhere in there.
Yeah,
you Packers fans.
Packer fans. So.
Yeah.
Sean, you know what's so bad? I just was told yesterday that they have an ad saying that I want to ban beer. I don't even know. I don't know how they even come up with this crazy stuff. It must be a digital ad. I like beer. I like my drinks.
It's very Brett Kavanaugh of you. I like beer.
Bourbon old fashioned.
The thing that's interesting to me is I did this live show Sunday night, and we're going through the ground game efforts in every one of the Battleground states, and the folks in Wisconsin were saying they don't see Tammy Baldwin, and I thought that was amazing. Is that, I mean, for her to make accusations against you, from what I understand, she has not been out on the campaign trail much.
She's running the same kind of strategy that Biden did in 20, or Kamala Harris has up until the last couple of weeks, which is non-existent. She does staged events. She barely deals with the press at all. She's ran from every debate. I'm only getting one debate on Friday night, this coming Friday. I mean, early voting has already started. Mail-in voting has been undergoing for a week. She doesn't want to stand out in front of people and address their questions or reporters' questions, even though the press is so much more favorable to her. But I even think it's starting to get them upset because she's just been non-existent, and she thinks she can just fly under the radar. But that's how she's always ran campaigns. She's run them from the standpoint of, I'm Tammy, I'm a moderate in most of the parts of the state other than here in Madison, which is progressive left. And as you and I both know, she's one of the most progressive left senators and votes for every crazy thing. She's a rubber stamp for the hard left part of the party.
The Senate Leadership Fund, I know a lot of what was happening is that you were running a really good campaign. You were out there sort of waving your hand saying, hey, guys, I can win this race. And the cavalry, at least from my perception, seems to be at least starting to come to your rescue and saying, okay, we got it. This is what the Senate Leadership Fund put out in a private note to donors. It says, after weathering months of brutal attacks on his character, Eric Hovde just launched one of the best cycles ads, flicking off the hard punches he's taken. As we enter the final months, Tammy Baldwin's negatives are higher than Hovde's, and the ballot has closed to a statistical dead heat, with Trump edging ahead in a generic Senate ballot that shows room for further growth. This race has become a top priority for SLF. Talk to me about the groups and the change and the shift that has occurred in, say, the last 7 to 10 days out there in Wisconsin for you.
Yeah, I would say it's actually started to shift probably about a month ago. Look, we started to see the low point in my polling was probably end of July, beginning mid of August, they were just spending an ungodly amount. We kind of pulled back on spending because we were looking, the last couple months going into it. And I was hoping that other groups would start showing up. But finally, I think they went too negative. I kept focused on issues that matter to people. And I think our ad campaign really started separating and calling her out for who she really is. And I think a lot of the state is starting to wake up to Senator Baldwin. And obviously what also happened in July and August was that bump for Kamala Harris. And that has clearly faded. Look, I think President Trump is probably, they say he's up a point or two. My guess is it's a couple points more because President Trump always underpolls in Wisconsin worse than any state. Look, I feel really good where things are going. We're getting the message out. I'm doing interviews with everybody. I'm not ceding any territory. That's what I said from the get-go. My first stop was in the Black community in Milwaukee. I've been in the Hispanic communities, Black churches, Hispanic churches. I'm fighting on college campuses. I was just on a college campus last night giving a speech. So, too often Republicans let the Democrats play on the entire territory and they only play in their lanes. And that's wrong. I mean, we've got to make a shift. Ronald Reagan, broad tent, bring as many people into our party. And that's what we need to do. And I think that's happening. And I'm really glad to see that President Trump, think when he went down to Atlanta and went into the Black community and the reaction he got. We've got to do more of that. And every Republican has to.
We mentioned the outside groups. You mentioned early voting. Talk to me about who's in the state and how it's going. In other words, early vote, absentee vote. What are you guys seeing?
Look, right now, we're seeing a nice uptick for Republican early voters. Tracking better than we would have hoped, and not as good for Democrats. I'm telling you, I think the momentum's on our side, and I feel really good about it. Look, there's a number of outside groups. I don't really follow all of it, but there's 2 or 3 outside groups that are doing door knocking outside of the county parties and the state party. So there's a lot of energy on our side. That's one thing, that's for sure. Look, Sean, I've given, 200-300 speeches, no, probably 300 or more. I've met with so many people. There is such a desperation by so many people. They're so worried about this country, about their economic well-being. A lot of people are hanging on by their fingernails, and it's wrong. We've got to restore this wonderful country of ours.
When I talk to pollsters, to a T, every one of them says the most difficult state in the country to poll is Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. So how do you get a sense? Is it just a gut? Is it going to events? How do you get a good sense of where the race is? Or do you actually have, do you have confidence in your polling?
Do I think polling can help and give a range? Absolutely. But fundamentally, I think polling has been broken for a while. It's really hard to poll people on a cell phone. Number 2, the left is more engaged. Think of who most Democratic voters. They are public employees and big corporate employees, and that's about 50-50, who are Republican employees. And I'm talking in a generalization, obviously. It's largely private sector, small, mid-sized business, and again, about 50-50 with big corporations. So when you're working for a small, mid-sized business and you're in the private sector, you're running a lot, and a lot of people don't have time, aren't interested in getting polled, where I think Democrats are a little more energized on the polling side. But there's another dynamic in Wisconsin, and people always like, why is it so? Why does President Trump underpoll so much? And it's real simple. It's one answer. It's called Dane County. It's where I'm from, Madison. Madison's the state capital. It's the university capital. It's the belly of the beast of the progressive left. So if somebody calls you or texts you, are you voting for President Trump? You're not going to tell them I'm voting for President Trump if you don't know that person. You're worried somebody's going to come egg your house or key your car or do something to you. So and yet Dane County is the second most Republican vote. So you underperform there. And then, we've got a lot of farmers in our state. And, farmers work hard. They get up early. They pretty much have their breakfast. They go out onto their farm. They work until 6 o'clock or 7 or later. And they come home. They're exhausted. They're not sitting and answering a 40-question poll. So those are the reasons why I think Wisconsin is a hard place to poll.
You mentioned farmers and the issues that concern them. Are there things that are flying below the radar issue-wise in Wisconsin that we're not hearing about?
Look, I've been on so many farms, and they all talk about regulations. I've been in a lot of factories, businesses. They all say the same thing. The regulatory state is choking them, and they're all very concerned about WOTUS, Waters of the United States, which would have crushing impact on a lot of farms. I mean, it would basically say a pond on a farm is going to be regulated like a navigable waterway. So it's insane. And it's just, the green energy initiatives, all of that. So that's a big issue. I'd say the other issue, but I think this is happening everywhere. It's just becoming very, a big topic. And that is what the Biden administration is pushing, which Senator Baldwin's fully behind this. And that is using the Department of Education to try to change Title IX to require schools to allow guys to play in girls' sports and go into their bathrooms and locker rooms. And if they don't accept those changes, Department of Education said they're going to withhold funds. I've even heard Department of Agriculture says they're going to withhold school lunch funds. Now, think of how insane that is. I mean, first of all, where do they get off holding taxpayer dollars that, it's our taxes in our local communities that go to Washington? Now they're not going to give them back. And how insane it is to try to push that radical agenda, which most people do not support. So I'd say those are probably two issues that, are definitely talked about that you don't hear a lot in the press.
Interesting. The other demographical issue that at least is a big issue for the presidential race is how Kamala Harris is underperforming with men, young men in particular, Black men in particular, Latino men. You're there, you mentioned in Madison, University of Wisconsin's there, big city. Talk to me about demographics. Let's start with just men in general. Is that something that you're out there seeing in terms of a gender gap?
Oh, 100%. There's not even a question about it. If you talk about the big difference in this race, it's where men are versus women. Obviously there's guys that will vote Democrat and there's women that, will vote Republican. But that is the big difference. Now, as it pertains to the Black community, I've been saying this for, 6 or 7 months. I think, older Black people will generally stay with the Democrats. A good chunk of women will, but young Black men are hemorrhaging out of that party. In the Hispanic population, that's a shift across the board, to be honest with you. It's not just men. It's women and men, probably a little bit more men. And college campuses, that's a very distinct difference. I did a parade on last Saturday at a college, and the amount of young guys that go, we're for you, was fantastic. So they're just sick of all the stuff that's been pushed on them, all the woke agenda, being told, you're bad, because you're a guy, trying to demasculate men. So I think they're just tired of all of the nonsense. So there's definitely a change there.
And you mentioned, how much do you think your campaign style is different than a sort of, a traditional Republican, meaning you talked about going on college campuses, going to some of these neighborhoods. Have you made it, because of your business background, that a different shift in how you campaign versus maybe how a lot of Republicans have in the past?
I feel comfortable going anywhere in any community. And again, I believe in the broad tent strategy that President Reagan has. Look, I get energized by campaigning. I have very thick skin. And so, going into areas that are not as friendly, it doesn't bother me like maybe some people it does. And I just believe that we need to create a movement. And we just got to start talking to these other groups. You know, a big part of the reason why Republicans have underperformed in the Black community because they haven't reached out and talked to them in the past. You know, that's one great thing that I'm seeing about President Trump doing. You know, again, Ronald Reagan did, but a lot of too many campaigns stay in their own lane, stay in their own territory. Look, I've done a lot of Republican events, but the last couple months, I'm not really going to a lot of Republican events. I'm going to factory floors. I'm going to areas where I can speak to as broad a group because I got to pull people from the middle. And that's what, you know, that's been what the campaign's been all about.
Yeah, I mean, at this point in a campaign, if you're going out to Republican events, you're kind of in trouble. You know, you mentioned the regulatory effect that farmers and others are having. That used to be a big Republican talking point, regulation. But the other big one that I think is getting short shrift, and maybe it's just because people don't want to hear about it, is debt and spending. And I feel like Republicans have lost. Ron Johnson, to me, has always been such a great, you know, he like you, he's got this, comes to Washington with a business sense. He's like, this isn't how we would operate. This is unacceptable. How do you, I mean, talk to me about when you get elected, priority wise, where does that stand for you? Because I worry that if we don't deal with our debt and deficit and spending, and I know it's not the sexiest issue, I get that, but it's sort of like if we just keep giving people what they want, that we're continuing to kick a can down the road and the roosters are going to come home very quick.
Sean, it's my number one issue. It's
Good.
probably the biggest reason I'm in this race because I've spent my life in the financial markets. You know, I own banks. I've been in the asset management business. I understand how our globalized and financialized economy works. And let me tell you, we already have entered into a debt crisis, and it's going to take a long time to get out of this mess. And, you know, everybody says, well, it's gone on. Everybody's been warning about a debt crisis. When, you know, what's the old line about going bankrupt? How did it happen slowly, then all at once? Debt crises build slowly, but when they come to an end, they come very abruptly and sharply. If you look at the great societies of human history, the Roman Empire, the different Chinese empires, the British Empire, the Dutch Empire, how do they always fail? They first lose their moral compass, and then they bankrupt themselves. We have $36 trillion of debt. Our interest costs on our debt is $1 trillion a year. It's bigger than our Defense Department budget, and within a year and a half, it'll be bigger than the cost of Social Security. If we don't get on to addressing this issue immediately, we're going to hit a wall, and you're going to start seeing the Federal Reserve starting to go back into quantitative easing, printing money. And if you think inflation was bad the last couple of years, you watch out because we can't default our way out of it. You know, an individual, a business, or a small government can default and bankrupt, restructure their debt. If the United States ever did that, would plunge the whole globe into a depression, and it would take generations to work its way out. So we're only going to be left with either getting on with smart fiscal policies and economic policies and taking time to get out of this mess, or they're going to use hyperinflation, and that destroys the quality of life for almost every American.
But first of all, God bless you. I'm so glad to hear you say this. But I feel like in Washington, we have this cycle, and here's how it goes. We start the year, everybody says we've got to do something about spending. We get to September 25th, and we go, we got 5 days until the end of the thing. We need to pass a continuing resolution. No one does anything in the interim, right? Spending is like, there are so many things, and sometimes people say, oh, it's not a big deal. Why are we not prioritizing this during the year? Looking at programs, asking for, the way that you would look at your business and say, hey, this isn't working any longer. This is duplicative. This isn't efficient. There's a better way to do business. We kick the can down the road over and over again. And respectfully, there's not one senator that I see on either side of the aisle willing to stand up and say enough is enough.
Well, you'll have a senator when I get there that will say enough is enough, because that's the biggest reason I'm doing this, as I said. I mean, there's a myriad of issues I would like to address, but that's the biggest issue. And I understand the consequences of it. But you're exactly right. There is no management of government. We need to go look at all the different programs. I mean, just look at welfare. The amount of different programs, the government one arm doesn't know what the left arm is doing. It's that none of them talk to each other. The amount of fraud that happens in our spending is enormous. I mean, I remember one time reading a report about home health care, 60% of the dollars spent were fraud. So nobody's managing government anymore. It's become this unmanageable behemoth. And that's one thing, I loved hearing when Elon Musk said if President Trump wins, he wants to head up a commission to look at all the different spending programs and prioritize them. God, do we desperately need that? And I look forward to working with him if I'm and President Trump are successful, because that has to become priority number one.
Well, I know I believe, I've said this publicly, I'll say it again here, but I think you're going to win. I feel good about Mike Rogers in Michigan and Dave McCormick in Pennsylvania, because the momentum's with you guys. The issues are with you guys. The campaign, the ground game is solid. So I wish you all the best. I'm looking forward to having you in Washington, because I do think we've gotten away from this, and we need someone who can stand up and say, this isn't sustainable, and I'm going to fight for what's right. So God bless you. Be safe in the last final days of the campaign, and good luck. We'll hopefully see you in November in Washington, getting ready to get sworn in.
Thanks so much, Sean. Great being on your show. And everybody, do everything you can to save this country. Send some money my way at erichovde.com. Tell your friends in Wisconsin. We've got to save America, folks. Thank you so much.
You bet. erichovde.com. Thank you, sir.
Take care.
All right. Great conversation with Eric. Big conversation coming up with Tommy Knepper. He is the CEO of Infield Strategies. These are the guys knocking on doors in the battleground states. We're going to find out from him what's happening, and this is important. But before I get to him, I want to tell you about a great sponsor of ours, Wired to Fish Coffee. Now, if you're a coffee drinker, you start your day with a cup of coffee, maybe even after lunch, you need it to power through the day. This is an amazing coffee. The beans are phenomenal. They're sourced from Guatemala and Mexico. It's amazing tasting, but better than anything else. What I love about it is when I usually go get an iced coffee or something, I always feel like I'm supporting some bad causes. Wired to Fish supports great causes that we can be proud to support. Faith-based organizations, clean water initiatives, 25% of what comes out of Wired to Fish goes back to causes that we can support. So you get a great cup of coffee, and you're supporting great causes. These are some of the best beans in the world. So head over to wired2coffeefish.com, and it's the number 2, wired2fishcoffee.com. Use the code WeCare for 15% off. Wired2fishcoffee.com, code word WeCare. All right, without further ado, Tommy Knepper. Hey, Tommy, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, so we talk a lot about ground game, early vote, all this stuff, door knocking. This is what you guys do, right? This is your wheelhouse. You do this for groups and organizations for a living, right?
It is, yeah. We've been in business a little over 8 years now, and this is all we do.
Okay,
knocking on doors, turning people out.
Good, because we want to know who these people are that are knocking on our doors. What battleground states are you guys working in right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're currently in Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, and Michigan.
Okay. And what type of things do you guys do?
Yeah, so I mean, we're all encompassing grassroots. So we do some phone calls, text messages, but the majority of what we do is knock on doors. And so we are going knocking on doors, talking to voters. Leading up to this GOTV portion, a lot of it was persuasion, absentee sign up chase. Right now, as we move into votes being cast, we saw in Georgia yesterday over 300,000 votes cast. It's all GOTV. So at this point, it's turning people out to the polls, getting them to cast their absentee ballots if they're permanent absentee voters. Then as we get closer to election day, obviously turning out voters to November 5th election. So our job is to knock on doors, make sure voters know what election's coming up, make sure they're voting for our candidates, and make sure they ultimately actually cast their vote.
All right, so let me break this down a couple ways. So who do you guys work for? Is it the PACs, the outside groups, the third parties? Who generally employs you guys, or is it the campaigns?
So in the past, we've typically worked for some of the big committees like the RNC, NRCC. Right now, we're working for some of the big PACs since they're absorbing a lot of the ground game. So we're working with America First Works and some of the other local PACs in some of these states.
Okay, so let's just role play this for a second. So they hire you guys, and then how does this work? You just go out, hire people, and say, here are the doors that we want you to knock on?
Yeah, so it depends how early they bring us to the table. Sometimes they want our input in terms of who we think we should target. But assuming they have a big polling firm, data firm, and a lot of these national campaigns obviously do, they'll have the target universe they want us going after. We work with them to develop the script, the messaging, the literature, but they will have a print house, obviously, that prints the lit. Our main job is to go out, find the canvassers, hire the right people, train them accordingly, and deploy them to knock on doors, and obviously monitor them as they're knocking on doors, make sure they're returning good data, not cutting any corners, and make sure they're presenting the campaign and the PAC's message well at the door.
Okay, so you hire someone. I am a person. Do you want to get people who are voting for, say, Donald Trump, or do you want to knock on somebody's door that you could vote for Donald Trump and they're persuadable, or both?
So both. So we're a big fan of not leaving anything on the table. So right now we can use something called dynamic scripting with most of these walk apps we use. So if you're using, especially paid canvassers, professional canvassers, you can have them knock on one door where it's a pro Donald Trump voter, and make sure, and they have an absentee ballot, and make sure they remember to cast their ballot now because they live in Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, and absentee voting is opened already. And you can knock on the next person's door who is a persuasion voter and deliver with them a different script, a different message, trying to persuade them to vote for Donald Trump. And then you can knock on a third door who is not an absentee voter. They're an election day voter who might be a Donald Trump supporter, but you also want to remind them, hey, the election's coming up. Make sure you turn out either an early vote, like those 300,000 plus people did in Georgia yesterday, or turn out on election day, November 5th, to cast your vote for Donald Trump. So,
right. So what if what if you knock on a door and there's two people, a husband and a wife? How does the dynamic scripting allow you to say, Mr. Smith, I want to tell you about this, but Mrs. Smith, I know that maybe, or vice versa, like one's a election day voter, or maybe one's a persuadable, but one's a committed?
Typically, you'll try to target one person in the household with that main messaging. So you wouldn't try to target a household with the same household with a turnout message and a persuasion message. You would determine, maybe the husband is a mid-propensity but solid Trump supporting voter. You want to target that person with a get out.
But when you say you would, so the canvasser that you have, this is on their app. Is that how it works?
It is, yeah. So we train them accordingly based on the messaging that they're going to carry. But when they actually go out to the door, they'll be carrying their phone or tablet, a smart device, whatever they have, and that's actually on the app itself. And so the script will change based on the target person that we are going after. And so we're not leaving it up to the canvasser to figure it out. That data is in there. The script will change based on the voter they're targeting, and then they will relay that messaging that's now in the app. Okay,
so you knock on my door. You say, Mr. Spicer, you're a high propensity voter. We see you're supporting Donald Trump. And so let's play this out. So what do you say? Hey, do you have a plan to vote early, or what is it that you want to ask me? I'm a 404. I voted for Trump. What do you want me to do?
Yeah. So, I mean, typically in our world, we would, if you're a 404 voter and you're a perfect voter and we know you're a Trump voter, we wouldn't knock on your door. Because
so that's important for people to hear. If you're a 404 voter, because I hear sometimes people say, I haven't gotten a knock on my door. It's because why spend the money?
Correct. Okay. We know you're going to vote, and we know you're a solid Trump voter who votes every single election. There's really no point in us spending the money to knock on your door or persuade you to do anything in the above, because you're going to vote. You always do.
All right. So let's say I'm a 2 of 4 Republican voter. You knock on my door. What are you going to ask me?
Yeah. So typically we will already know if you've requested absentee ballot or not. And so if you
I live in Virginia. I live in Virginia. Early vote is started. Early vote in person. What do you want me to do?
We want you to get out and vote early. So we want to bank as many votes as we can right now. We don't want you to wait until election day. That affects, the general mood of the electorate. The media will cover the early returns, the absentee returns, the early vote returns. They'll draw comparisons, faulty or not, but they will draw comparisons between the Democrat and Republican turnout. And so to the extent that we can tamp that down on our side, have more of our votes vote early, it helps tamp that down. It also allows us to shift our resources to those voters who have not yet voted. So if you're a 204 Republican, we're going to knock on your door 3, 4, 5 times before November 5th. But if I can get you to vote now, then we can remove you from our target list, which allows us to take those 4 or 5 knocks that would have gone to your door and shift them to somebody else and get them to vote, thus increasing our total vote across the state, across the region. And so we want you to vote as early as possible, because it allows us to save money and convert those resources to target additional folks who have not voted. So if in theory, if we can get every single 204 Trump voter to vote by, October 30th, that last week going into November 5th, we can shift everyone down to 104 Trump voters or 04 Trump voters and bank even more votes. And so the earlier that you can vote in these states, the better it is for us to save resources and continue to target, lower propensity voters.
All right, so you knock on my door. I'm a 204 voter. I say, hey, tomorrow afternoon, I'm voting in person here in Alexandria. Who gets that data? When you log that in, where does it go?
So it goes back into the data warehouse, and depending who which entity you're working for, most of the clearinghouse for us is through the data trust. And so the Republican side, it'll go back into a warehouse that is then shared with other groups that can legally access that data, and allows the holistic organization across all these PACs, the campaigns themselves, the committees themselves, especially with the new FEC ruling this year, where canvassing can be coordinated, or cooperative canvassing at least. We share all that data across the whole organization. They'll know who just got a knock on their door. They'll know what that data coming back says. The pollsters and the data analysts will be able to compare what you said at the door compared to what they had originally anticipated you saying at the door, and help us fine tune our messaging down the stretch. Or you go and you cast your ballot. We'll get that data back sometime next week. We'll remove everyone who did vote, and then we continue to refine our targeting moving forward. So that's the way it works. All that data is rolled back in. All of it is analyzed to make sure we're targeting the right people, first of all, down the stretch, and then making sure those people that are the right people are casting their votes as early as possible.
So, I mean, in theory, though, I cast my vote. The ecosystem on the right knows that I've got a plan. I cast my ballot. I've already, by the way, I've said that just so the audience gets it. I did vote already in Alexandria. But once I do that, then you guys, it's the pollsters know that I voted, so they can factor that into their model. The campaign knows that they can stop sending mail to me. Not to knock on my door anymore. Is that kind of how it flows out?
It does, yeah. And so, exactly. It's exactly how it flows out. And then the data component is important, because if we start seeing, for some reason, that a ton of our 204 voters in a certain demographic. So, for your example, 204 males in a certain age range are voting really early. We'll want to double down on that demographic and turn more of those folks out as early as possible. And so the data component is important too, not only removing them from the overall targeting list that we save money, but also making sure that demographic that we're hoping is voting early is actually voting. If they are, double down. If they're not, figure out why they're not, maybe change messaging. So the whole system feeds itself. It feeds the messaging, the turnout operation, all of the above. And so, again, the more the data that you give us at the door, the more conversational you are, and the earlier you vote, the more it helps our whole team.
Okay, so chat away when you get a knock on the door.
Yeah.
You mentioned a couple of these states. Let's start Arizona. Tell me about what's happening in Arizona and what we should be looking for.
Yeah, and so we're, Arizona has a large absentee, vote. Obviously, they did change the rules a little bit from previous years to now, where you could cast a ballot, and I think they absorbed it up until 3 days after. Similar in North Carolina, in Georgia. So they changed that to where it has to be received by Election Day. So a lot of the GOTV in Arizona is happening right now, because for you to mail your absentee ballot in, it really needs to be mailed by that last Wednesday or Thursday of October. In order to be received by Election Day. And so,
and it wasn't, Arizona, so does that mean it wasn't last cycle? Your ballot could come in after Election Day?
Yeah, like in California, where you can receive it for a couple of days after the election, it still is counted. As long as it was mailed by Election Day is what mattered. So there's usually a 2 to 3 day window after Election Day where they could be counted, even if as long as they were postmarked by Election Day, received 2 days later, they could be counted. Arizona has changed that. And so it now has to be received in hand by Election Day. And so, most of the Arizona GOTV is happening right now. I mean, that it'll run up until kind of that last week of October. And then, most of the ballots will be cast. Now, you can still walk your ballot in, obviously, on Election Day or that weekend leading up to Election Day. They'll have early vote locations open. But in Arizona, we're seeing an intense ground battle. It's really close. I'm sure you saw a lot of the polls come out earlier this week where Trump is gaining in a lot of these states. But large swaths of absentee votes will be counted. The data returns we don't have quite yet, so we'll start seeing that later this week and next week in terms of how many Democrats versus Republicans are casting ballots. But it's definitely a dogfight. Us Republicans have a very good organization. Trump plays very well there. It's going to be close, and so I think if you're in Arizona and you're Republican, we need every vote that we can get as early as possible, again, so we can continue to shift resources and target some down ballot stuff. There's a big abortion initiative on the ballot there too that's helping drive turnout on our side. So I think we've got a good shot. But it's going to be a dogfight, and we need some ballots, cast early as possible.
But is it sounds to me like what you're saying is that the environment is more favorable to us than it was 4 years ago.
I think it is. I think, really across the country, it seems like it is. It's, a lot of people were undecided still down the stretch, but you're seeing that polling tightening. You're seeing the numbers in terms of, absentee requests 4 years ago compared to now have flattened out, which is typically good for us. We perform a lot better on election day. And so a lot of these states that changed over and allowed much bigger absentee voting pools during COVID, that growth has plateaued, and so that's better for us in the long run because we can convince our voters to vote on election day a lot better than Democrats can. And so the fact that they haven't just continued this rise in terms of absentee requests on the Democrat side is good for us. And so I think it's better for us than it was 4 years ago. None of these states are automatic. It's going to be a dogfight in all of them, but I think we're in a good spot right now. With 3 weeks to go.
Okay, what about Georgia? I know we've gotten a couple days of early voting there. Do you feel good about Georgia? I know there's some people who are saying, well, a lot of the rural vote is coming in. It's a lot whiter. It's hard, I think, in my opinion, to try to discern what all of this means this early in early voting.
Yeah, until we see the breakdown, the demographic or partisan breakdown, I guess, of the vote that came in yesterday, we really won't know exactly how it's looking. That being said, the feeling on the ground is there. We worked, Brian Kemp's campaign last cycle, and it's got a lot of similar excitement. Maybe not quite as much with Kemp, just because he's a very popular governor, but very close to it, if not quite there. And so we're feeling that on the ground. While we don't have the exact data back yet, I'd say a good chunk of that vote that came in yesterday was definitely our voters, and they seem excited. They seem fired up. They seem tired of the Democrat nonsense. And so I think in Georgia, and you hear a lot of the mainstream media talking about PA and Georgia are going to decide this election. Well, I can say in Georgia, I feel pretty good. I feel better about Georgia than Arizona even. So I feel good there.
Really? Why do you feel better about Georgia than Arizona? That actually, I'm not sure if that makes me feel better or worse.
We need both states, obviously, but the feeling on the ground again. And so in 2016, actually, I was the Pennsylvania state director for the Republican National Committee. So where we flipped Pennsylvania the first time in 30 years. And it just has a similar feeling on the ground that the data wouldn't necessarily point to it. But when you're on the ground there, we've got a good sized staff working in a number of counties. And you just have this general feeling of the people coming out, kind of like you mentioned, the rural areas. The city vote is a little more in flux. You're seeing Trump making a lot of inroads with some minority communities, so especially in areas like Atlanta. And if the rural areas come out strong, it's similar to what happened in Pennsylvania in 2016, where the T of the state surged and you had less of the surge in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and Trump was able to win the state. And so it feels like that same kind of election in Georgia this cycle.
So do you think when we hear about a big number coming out of Georgia, but a lot of it coming from rural, do you think that's Republicans getting on board of early voting, or is that Democrats doing their part, driving up their vote?
Yeah, I think it's mainly Republicans getting on board with early voting. I also actually, in a weird twist of fate, think the hurricane helped some of that. The Georgians, especially in some of those rural northern areas, realize, you can't guarantee the weather right now. And so the fact that they have the opportunity to vote, they're going out and voting.
Okay, interesting.
Early.
All right, we'll keep an eye on that. You mentioned Michigan as another state. Tell me what you think that is.
Yeah, Michigan. The Rust Belt is one area where in the polling, national polling especially, you're seeing everything really tighten. If Trump can run the Rust Belt again like he did in 2016, then the race is over, right? So Michigan is another one where we're seeing it tighten. Seeing the across the board, actually, top of the ballot and down tighten up. We're working some down ballot stuff there too. So I think it's a tighter race. Again, I think Georgia is more winnable, but I think Michigan's there. I really think all four states that we're working in are very winnable. They all are going to come down to turnout operations, and they're going to come down to a dogfight in the street. So we have a pretty good operation in Michigan, knocking on doors. I think we're in a good spot, but again, we need as many votes cast as early as possible so that we can continue to drive our messaging, to lower propensity voters, because that's what the Democrats are going to do.
Remind me, what's the fourth state you mentioned?
North Carolina.
No, that's right. Okay. How does this storm affect North Carolina? That's been my big concern.
Yeah. So, in the western parts of the state, they got slammed. I was reading this morning, I think they got, out of the early vote locations in that region, they were expecting to have about 80 and they got 75 open. So it sounds like they're figuring out ways to get majority of their early vote locations open still. They're allowing people who had their property and whatnot destroyed, a little more time to figure out a polling location, more early vote locations, more time to figure it out. allowing some of them, if they, live in that area and had their information destroyed, to cast provisional ballots, which will help us on that side of the state, especially. So it seems like they're doing everything they can to give those folks access. Obviously their roads are destroyed, communications down in some areas still. So that will affect stuff. My hope is that they get all that fixed by November 5th, and, majority of those folks can still cast ballots. But it's as of this morning, the report for early vote locations was encouraging, but there's still a long ways to go to make sure all those folks have a chance to vote.
Okay. And how do you feel? How do you rank North Carolina as a state?
I think it's up there. I mean, I think the scandal around the kind of top of the ticket, below Trump, but top of the ticket in North Carolina hurt us a little bit. We're hearing some of that at the doors.
Really?
But Trump plays well there, and so I think he can pull. I think he'll still pull across the finish line. How many he brings along on his coattails, I'm not sure, but Trump at top of the ticket seems strong.
Okay, Tommy Knepper, CEO of Infield Strategies. Thanks for being with us. Really appreciate the insight on that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sean. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Guys, thanks for tuning in. A big week ahead next week. We're into the final 2-week stretch. You're going to want to be here. Road to 270 every Wednesday going forward. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here Monday. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.